The morning sun filtered through the towering glass walls of Manhattan's skyline, bouncing off steel and shimmering windows like liquid fire. Traffic rumbled along Fifth Avenue, a symphony of horns and footsteps weaving through the city's restless rhythm. At the heart of it all was Richard Kane, a man who seemed to command every room he entered, yet carried an invisible distance that not even billions could bridge. His tailored suit reflected power, his sharp gaze revealed calculation. But inside, Richard often wondered if all that wealth had built him a fortress or a cage. This day, however, was not just another boardroom triumph waiting to unfold. It was the start of a shift that would drag him out of his polished world and force him to confront something money alone could never fix. But before we dive deeper into this story of lives colliding in the unlikeliest way, let me remind you, subscribe to this channel so you never miss tales that explore the thin line between chance and destiny, privilege and survival. Richard Kane was not the only soul beginning his day. Across the East River, in a Brooklyn neighborhood where sidewalks cracked beneath years of wear, 14-year-old Amara Johnson zipped her frayed backpack and adjusted the second-hand jacket her mother had bought at a community sale. The sound of salsa music drifted from an open apartment window, blending with the scent of fried plantains from a corner food cart. For Amara, these streets carried both danger and familiarity. Her mother's shift at the hospital left her to navigate school and home mostly on her own, but Amara had something rare, an observant eye and a notebook she filled with sketches and words that captured the world others ignored. That notebook would soon carry more weight than she could ever imagine. Meanwhile, 17-year-old Ethan Kane woke up in his father's penthouse overlooking Central Park. Marble floors stretched beneath his sneakers as he wandered the spacious halls, feeling suffocated by the perfection around him. To most, Ethan lived in a dream, a private school education, luxury cars waiting at his disposal, doors opened simply because of his last name. Yet for Ethan, privilege felt like a cage of expectations. His father demanded excellence, discipline, and control. Ethan longed for freedom, even if it meant slipping into shadows that Richard worked so hard to keep him from. Though they lived just a few miles apart, Amara and Ethan's worlds couldn't have been more different. One measured survival by bills barely paid, the other by grades, reputation, and pressure to uphold a legacy. Yet the threads of their stories were already weaving toward an inevitable collision. Richard began his day in a conference room perched high above the city. His voice carried authority as he discussed a new expansion deal with investors, yet beneath the polished words lingered an unspoken worry. Ethan had been skipping classes. Rumors of reckless behavior reached Richard through whispers of staff and school administrators. For a man used to controlling outcomes, his son's unpredictability was the one battle he could not simply outspend. Amara, on the other hand, walked briskly to school, clutching her notebook tight. She wrote down fragments she overheard on buses, on stoops, in playgrounds. Stories live in the spaces between people, her late grandmother used to say. Amara believed it. Writing gave her power in a world that often made her feel invisible. She didn't know yet that one of those scribbled notes would soon carry more value than all of Richard Kane's empire. As the city pulsed with routine, destinies shifted quietly. Richard stared out from his skyscraper window, wondering how to reach a son who kept slipping further away. Ethan, restless, scrolled through his phone, already planning to ditch another class. Amara, tired but determined, adjusted her notebook strap and whispered to herself, "Today I'll notice something important." The day had only just begun, yet the current beneath their lives was pulling fast. In the chaos of New York, paths were about to cross in ways none of them could control, and one handwritten message would change everything. Brooklyn's morning air carried a chill that bit against the skin, but Amara Johnson moved quickly, weaving past the cracked sidewalks and faded murals that told the history of her neighborhood. The hum of buses and the chatter of neighbors filled her ears, grounding her in the rhythm she had always known. Her school stood a few blocks away, its red brick walls weathered by decades of use. Inside, hallways smelled faintly of disinfectant and cafeteria food, and teachers balanced dedication with exhaustion. Amara tucked her notebook under her arm as if it were fragile glass, her shield against the world's noise. "Amara, "You got the homework?" a classmate asked, sliding beside her. "Yeah, but I can't keep giving you answers," she said, shaking her head. "One day you'll thank me for saying no." Her voice carried firmness, but her eyes softened. She wasn't cruel, just aware of how little room for error her life allowed. With her mother's long hours at the hospital and bills stacked on the kitchen counter, Amara knew responsibility better than most kids her age. Across the city, luxury echoed in contrast. Richard Kane's office soared above Midtown, framed with leather chairs, abstract art, and the soft click of polished shoes against marble floors. Assistants moved with precision, placing documents before him, their voices clipped and professional. Richard skimmed through proposals worth millions, nodding in approval, rejecting with curt words when ideas failed to impress. Power was his language, efficiency his armor. Yet beneath the gloss of confidence, his jaw tensed. He thought of Ethan's growing defiance, the boy's silence at the dinner table, the sharp roll of his eyes whenever Richard spoke of discipline or ambition. That silence was louder than any boardroom dispute. Ethan, meanwhile, sat in a prep school classroom overlooking Central Park. The room buzzed with quiet tension as students tapped on laptops and teachers droned about history and economics. But Ethan's eyes drifted to the window. The city stretched endlessly, alive with movement and temptation. His phone vibrated with a message from a friend. "Skip after lunch? Got a spot." Ethan smirked, slipping the phone back into his pocket, already planning his escape. "Ethan," the teacher's voice snapped, "would you care to answer the question?" He glanced at the board, then shrugged. "Sorry, wasn't listening," the teacher sighed. "Your father's generosity keeps this school running, but generosity only goes so far. You need to take this seriously." Ethan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Maybe I don't want to take it seriously." The room went quiet, students glancing at him with a mix of envy and disbelief. Ethan's defiance wasn't courage. It was the restless anger of someone who felt unseen in all the wrong ways. Back in Brooklyn, Amara listened carefully as her teacher discussed literature. She scribbled notes faster than anyone else, her handwriting tight and purposeful. Words mattered to her, not because they promised a career someday, but because they gave her the power to understand, to interpret, to resist being erased. Her mother always reminded her, "Education is the ticket out, baby girl. Don't ever let anyone tell you different." At lunch, she sat by the window, sketching in her notebook. Her drawings captured faces on buses, strangers at corner stores, the posture of a weary nurse stepping off a late shift. In a city that never slowed, Amara noticed what others missed. While Amara's world demanded resilience, Richard's demanded control, and Ethan's demanded escape. 3 orbits circling the same city, unaware that gravity was already pulling them together. As evening approached, Amara's mother returned home, her tired face breaking into a smile. "You eat yet, Mara?" she asked, kicking off her shoes. "Not yet. Was waiting for you," Amara replied. They ate together at their small kitchen table, laughter breaking through the day's fatigue. Across town, Richard dined alone at a table set for 3, the silence stretching across polished silverware and expensive china. Ethan's empty chair gnawed at him, a reminder that some absences money could never fill. The city settled into night, lights glittering across bridges and rooftops. Lives so different, separated by wealth and chance, yet already leaning toward a point where they would collide. The subway station near Amara's school was always alive with motion, the squeal of metal wheels grinding against tracks echoing through tiled walls. Vendors called out over the noise, selling pretzels and dollar coffee, while the air carried a mix of damp concrete and city heat. It was here, on an ordinary afternoon, that Amara first noticed the boy who did not belong. He stood a few feet away, leaning against a pillar, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his designer jacket. Ethan Kane looked restless, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds. His blonde hair caught the fluorescent light, but his expression was closed off, a blend of irritation and unease. Amara had seen many people pass through this station, but something about him snagged her attention. He seemed both out of place and on the edge of something dangerous. Amara watched quietly from the bench as Ethan shifted his weight, his eyes narrowing at a group gathered near the far end of the platform. Three older teens, their clothes rough and their voices low, moved with an energy that Amara recognized all too well. She'd grown up around kids who got pulled into things they couldn't handle, things that promised quick respect but ended in long regrets. Ethan walked toward them, hesitation flickering in his step before he forced confidence into his stride. "Yo, you showed up," one of the boys said, grinning. His voice carried casual menace. "Yeah," Ethan replied, his tone trying for nonchalance but cracking at the edges. Amara leaned forward, her heartbeat quickening. She couldn't hear every word, but she caught fragments, plans, money, risks. The way Ethan's hands trembled as he shoved them deeper into his jacket told her enough. He wasn't in control of this moment. She bit her lip, debating whether to look away. It wasn't her business. People got themselves tangled in messes all the time, and stepping in usually made things worse. But her instincts screamed that this was different. The group shifted closer to Ethan, one boy slapping him on the shoulder in a way that felt more like a claim than camaraderie. Ethan nodded, forcing a laugh, but his eyes betrayed him. They darted around the station, landing briefly on Amara. For a moment, their gazes locked. She saw the fear behind his defiance, the silent plea he didn't dare voice. Her fingers closed around her notebook. Words had always been her way of fighting back, of carving truth into a world that ignored her. Without giving herself time to reconsider, she flipped to a blank page and scribbled quickly, "You don't look safe. Be careful. They're not your friends." Her hand shook as she tore the page out. She folded it once, then again, pressing it flat. The idea of giving it to him felt absurd. Who was she to intervene in the life of a stranger, especially someone who clearly came from a world far above hers? But then she imagined the silence of her own neighborhood nights, the names of kids whispered after they disappeared into bad choices. If she stayed quiet, she might later regret it in ways she couldn't bear. "Amara, what are you doing?" her friend Tasha whispered, tugging at her sleeve. "Nothing," Amara muttered, slipping the note into her pocket. But her heart was loud with resolve. On the platform, Ethan laughed weakly at something one of the boys said, though his shoulders were tense. The train roared into the station, its wind pushing at coats and hair, drowning voices for a moment. As passengers surged forward, Amara stood abruptly. Her friend stared. "You're not seriously E." But Amara didn't answer. She pressed the folded note tight in her palm. The train's arrival gave her cover, a chance to move, though she didn't yet know if she had the courage to hand it over. The noise, the press of bodies, the blur of faces, all of it pulled tighter around her. Ethan was stepping closer to the train doors, surrounded by shadows disguised as allies. Amara clenched her jaw. Her decision was no longer about what made sense. It was about what felt right. And as the subway doors slid open with a harsh chime, her path was set. The evening air outside Lincoln Center shimmered with the glow of spotlights and the murmur of cameras. Their charity gala was unfolding, its red carpet lined with reporters eager for quotes and flashes of luxury. Richard Kane stepped from his black car, expression calm, his presence commanding without effort. He adjusted his cufflinks, nodding politely at journalists who called his name. Applause from a waiting crowd swelled as he strode inside, surrounded by the invisible shield of bodyguards and reputation. But Richard's mind wasn't on the gala. His attention kept drifting toward Ethan, who had skipped dinner again. He told himself not to dwell on it here, not in front of cameras, yet his chest carried a weight he couldn't ignore. His son was slipping further each day, and Richard's wealth offered him no purchase against the slide. Amara lingered at the edge of the crowd, heart pounding. She didn't belong here. Her jacket too thin, her shoes worn from long walks across Brooklyn sidewalks. Yet something had pulled her to this place, the folded note burning in her pocket like a live ember. She had followed instinct, the same instinct that told her the blonde boy at the subway wasn't just another stranger. And now, in front of her, stood a man whose face appeared in newspapers and on billboards. Richard Kane. Her throat tightened. What was she doing? She was just a kid with a piece of paper. Billionaires didn't listen to girls from cracked sidewalks. Still, her legs moved before her mind caught up. She pressed through the crowd, ignoring the irritated mutters as she slipped between people, her small frame barely noticed until she stood only a few feet away from him. "Mr. Kane!" Her voice cracked. Richard turned, his gaze sharp, momentarily softened by surprise. The bodyguard stepped closer, blocking her path. "She's just a kid," one muttered, half dismissive. But Amara's hand shot forward, clutching the folded paper like her life depended on it. "Please, take this. It's important." The guard frowned, ready to push her back, but Richard raised a hand. His instincts, honed by years of deals and betrayals, rarely gave strangers the benefit of the doubt. Yet there was something in the girl's eyes, a mix of fear and urgency that unsettled him. He reached for the note, his fingers brushing hers for the briefest second before she let go. "Thank you," Richard said automatically, already preparing to pocket it without thought. But Amara's voice broke through, trembling and insistent. "Read it, please." Right now. The desperation in her tone made him pause. Cameras flashed nearby, reporters shouting questions, but Richard unfolded the note. The handwriting was hurried, uneven, but clear. "Your son is being watched. He is in danger. Trust me." A chill cut through the evening warmth. Richard's jaw tightened as he read it again, the words too stark to ignore. He looked up sharply, but Amara had already stepped back, swallowed by the crowd pressing around the gala entrance. The bodyguard leaned closer. "Sir, it's nonsense. Probably some stunt." Richard slipped the note into his pocket, forcing his face back into composure. But the words gnawed at him, pulling at the unease he'd carried about Ethan for weeks. The possibility, however slim, couldn't be brushed aside. He'd built empires by listening to whispers others ignored. Could he afford to dismiss this one? Inside the gala, chandeliers sparkled, and the sound of violins filled the air, but Richard barely heard it. His mind replayed the girl's voice, the tremor of conviction when she begged him to read. Across the city, Ethan's silence stretched like a shadow Richard could no longer measure. The evening wore on, but the note remained in his pocket, its weight heavier than any deal he had ever signed. Richard Kane sat in the back of his car as it glided through the streets, the gala still buzzing behind him. The city lights streaked across tinted windows, but his thoughts were pinned to the folded note in his pocket. He unfolded it once more, reading the shaky handwriting under the dim glow of the car's interior light. "Your son is being watched. He is in danger. Trust me." The words seemed to pulse with urgency, refusing to let him rest. His chief of security, James Turner, glanced at him from the front seat. "You've been staring at that paper all night, sir. Want to share what's on it?" Richard hesitated, then handed it over. James skimmed it quickly, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Sir, this is nothing. Some street kid trying to spook you, maybe even get attention. Happens all the time." Richard frowned. She didn't look like she wanted attention. She looked desperate. "Desperate people make things up," James replied. "You know how many notes, emails, and letters we screen every day claiming threats against you and your family? 99% are nonsense. This is no different." Richard leaned back, but unease churned inside him. He had built his empire by recognizing when something others dismissed mattered. Still, doubt clung to him. Was he reading too much into the shaky scrawl of a teenager? Meanwhile, Ethan slipped out of his school the next day without hesitation. He ignored texts from his father's driver and turned down a side street, hoodie pulled tight. His phone buzzed with a message, "Meet at the corner." "Don't be late." He quickened his pace, adrenaline mixing with defiance. Every step away from his father's orbit felt like freedom, even if that freedom came wrapped in risk. Richard received a call that afternoon from Ethan's school. The headmaster's voice was polite but firm. "Mr. Kane, Ethan has skipped 3 classes this week. We're concerned about the company he's keeping." Richard pinched the bridge of his nose. "Company?" "I can't say for certain," the headmaster admitted, "but some of the boys he's with aren't exactly the type who value education. You might want to look into it." After hanging up, Richard summoned James to his office. The skyline stretched wide behind him, but all he could see was Ethan's absence. "I want surveillance tightened around my son, discreetly." James raised an eyebrow. "You think the note was real?" "I don't know what to think," Richard said sharply, "but I won't gamble with his safety." Back in Brooklyn, Amara walked home from school, her backpack heavy not with books but with the weight of being ignored. She had risked so much pushing through that crowd, handing over her warning only to feel invisible again. "He probably thinks I'm crazy," she muttered under her breath. Her mother noticed her distracted silence at dinner. "You all right, baby?" her mother asked, spooning stew into their bowls. Amara hesitated. She wanted to tell her, to unload the story of the billionaire, the boy, the note. But something inside told her to hold back. "Just tired, Mom," she said softly. Her mother reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Don't carry too much on your own. You hear me?" Amara nodded, though the secret pressed harder against her chest. Richard, in his penthouse, poured himself a glass of bourbon, but left it untouched. He stood by the window, staring out at the restless city, the note lying on his desk like an accusation. Was it paranoia to believe a stranger's words, or negligence to ignore them? For now, he let the city's hum answer in silence, unaware that Ethan was already stepping deeper into the shadows Amara had tried to warn him about. Richard Kane wasn't a man who ignored his instincts for long. The note gnawed at him through sleepless nights, and though James dismissed it, Richard knew he needed a different kind of insight, someone unbound by corporate loyalty. That's when he called Marcus Lee. Marcus was a former NYPD detective, now working as a private investigator. His reputation carried weight, sharp-eyed, persistent, unafraid to tell uncomfortable truths. When Richard's assistant arranged the meeting, Marcus showed up at Kane Tower in a worn leather jacket, his stride unhurried, his gaze quietly observant. "You don't call me unless it's serious," Marcus said, sliding into a chair across from Richard's desk. Richard exhaled. "I need you to look into my son, discreetly." Marcus's brows furrowed. "You want me to investigate Ethan?" "I want to know if he's in danger," Richard clarified. He pulled the folded note from a drawer and handed it over. Marcus studied the words, then leaned back, expression unreadable. "Who gave you this?" "A girl, young, 14 maybe. She forced it into my hand outside a gala." Marcus tapped the paper thoughtfully. "You think she knows something or just making noise?" "That's what I need you to find out," Richard said. "I don't care if it costs me. Just keep Ethan safe." Marcus nodded slowly. "Money doesn't buy time, Richard, but it can buy answers. I'll start tonight." Meanwhile, Ethan drifted further from the safety his father tried to build. After school, he met up with the same group Amara had noticed, their laughter too sharp, their eyes too practiced. They hung out by a basketball court in Harlem, where music blasted from a nearby speaker and the smell of fried food drifted from a cart. Ethan tried to blend in, mimicking their swagger, but a quiet knot in his stomach reminded him he wasn't one of them. "Yo, Kane," one boy called, tossing him a ball. "You sure you can hang with us?" Ethan caught it, forcing a grin. "Try me." Their approval felt intoxicating, louder than his father's constant disappointment. Still, beneath the thrill, a shadow lingered. He was playing with forces he didn't understand. Amara, too, hadn't forgotten. Each day she replayed the moment she'd handed the note to Richard Kane. Did he believe her? Did he care? She scribbled in her notebook during lunch, her handwriting tight and hurried. What if he ignores it? What if something happens to that boy, and I did too little? Her friend Tasha leaned over. "You still thinking about that rich guy?" Amara shut the notebook quickly. "I'm thinking about his son." "He didn't look safe." Tasha rolled her eyes. "Girl, that's not your world. You need to focus on yourself." But Amara couldn't. She'd seen enough in her neighborhood to know when someone was walking blind into danger. Ethan Kane might have money, but money didn't shield anyone from choices made in dark corners. Back at Kane Tower, Marcus returned with his first findings. He laid photos on Richard's desk. Ethan leaving school, Ethan meeting with unfamiliar boys, Ethan slipping away into neighborhoods his father's security rarely watched. Richard's stomach tightened as he scanned the images. "Who are they?" "Not good news," Marcus replied. "These kids are connected to a crew that runs errands for bigger players. Small time now, but tied to people who know how to make trouble. Richard's hand clenched around the edge of the desk. And my son. Looks like he's being tested, Marcus said evenly. They'll see what he's willing to do, then pull him in deeper. If that note is right, eyes are already on him. Silence filled the room, broken only by the muffled hum of traffic below. Richard stared at the photo of Ethan laughing beside boys who lived by different rules. His son wasn't just rebelling, he was standing at the edge of something far darker. And for the first time in years, Richard felt powerless. The chill of early spring settled over Queens, the air damp with the promise of rain. Ethan stood at the edge of a cracked basketball court, shoving his hands into his hoodie, while the group circled around him. Music pulsed from a speaker someone had balanced on a trash can, but underneath the bass throb, tension simmered. "Tonight's simple," one of the older boys said, his voice low but firm. His name was Darius, and the others followed his lead without question. "We need you to run a quick errand. Nothing heavy, just show us you're serious." Ethan nodded, trying to mask the nervous flutter in his stomach. "What kind of errand?" Darius grinned. "Relax, just a pickup. You walk in, grab a bag, bring it back. Easy." Ethan forced a laugh, though his palms were damp. "Yeah, easy." But his gut twisted. He wasn't naive. He knew errands like this weren't as harmless as they sounded. Still, the way the others slapped him on the back, the way they said his name with approval, made him feel like he finally belonged somewhere. Across the borough, Amara walked home with her notebook pressed against her chest. She had overheard enough the last time she passed Ethan and the group to know something bad was brewing. Words like job and money weren't just harmless chatter. She told herself to let it go, that rich boys made their own choices, but she couldn't quiet the unease. That night she sat at her small desk staring at a blank page. Her pencil hovered before she scrawled a frantic entry. "He's in deeper than before. If I don't say something, will I regret it forever?" Her mother tapped softly on the door. "Mara, lights out soon. You've got school in the morning." "Yeah, Mom, just finishing homework," she replied, quickly closing the notebook. But homework wasn't what kept her awake. It was the image of Ethan's uncertain eyes, the look of someone walking into a trap without realizing it. Back in Manhattan, Marcus reported to Richard with more updates. He set another photo on the desk, Ethan mid-laugh beside Darius. "Your son's on the hook, they're pulling him deeper." Richard clenched his jaw. "What do they want from him?" "Leverage," Marcus said. "Your name, your money, they'll see him as a door to something bigger." Richard leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "I give him everything. And still His voice broke off, frustration tangled with fear. "He doesn't even see the danger." Marcus's tone was steady. "Most kids don't until it's too late." Ethan, meanwhile, followed the group down dimly lit streets. The pickup point was a corner store shuttered for the night. Darius handed him a folded piece of paper with an address and instructions. "You got this, Kane. We'll be watching." Ethan tucked the paper into his pocket, his pulse hammering. He told himself it was just one task, one step to prove he wasn't just the spoiled son of a billionaire. Yet with each step, unease clawed higher in his chest. The city pressed in, shadows stretching long under the flicker of broken street lamps. Ethan kept walking, pretending he belonged, while deep down he knew he was already in over his head. Amara sat awake in her bed, the hum of traffic outside her window. She whispered into the darkness, "I should have done more." Her fingers traced the edge of her notebook, knowing tomorrow she might have to risk another warning, even if no one listened. The night held its breath, danger circling closer to Ethan while Amara wrestled with the weight of silence. Amara's thoughts refused to settle. All day in class, her pencil scratched nervously against her notebook, but the words she wrote weren't assignments. They were fragments of warnings, half-formed sentences trying to capture the storm she felt inside. She had seen Ethan with those boys again, had caught enough of their conversation to know it wasn't just harmless rebellion. Something real, something dangerous was closing in. At lunch, Tasha nudged her. "You're zoning out again. What's with you lately?" Amara pressed her lips together, then whispered, "That boy I told you about, the one I gave the note to, he's in worse trouble. I can feel it." Tasha groaned. "Mara, you're not some superhero. You can't save everybody." "I'm not trying to save everybody," Amara shot back, her voice low but steady. But if I see someone about to fall and I say nothing, then what does that make me? That night she tore a sheet from her notebook and began writing again, this time carefully, every word chosen with urgency. His name is Ethan. He's with a group that calls themselves Darius's Boys. They meet near the Harlem courts and sometimes in Queens. They're pulling him into something. Please don't ignore this. She folded the note twice, staring at it until her hands trembled. If he doesn't believe me this time, she whispered, at least I'll know I tried. Meanwhile, Richard sat in his office late into the evening, Marcus across from him with another stack of photos. Ethan appeared in every one, leaning against graffiti-marked walls, joking with boys who had the look of experience in all the wrong things. Richard slammed his fist against the desk. Why won't he see it? Why won't he just listen? His voice cracked on the last word. Marcus remained calm. He thinks he's proving himself. Kids like him, they want to escape the shadow of their parents. But sometimes the path they take is darker than they realize. Richard rubbed his temples, the note from days before still on his desk. And that girl, he muttered. Why did she know before I did? The next afternoon, as Richard exited Kane Tower, Amara stood on the sidewalk clutching her second note. She spotted him instantly, his stride purposeful, his suit immaculate, the air around him buzzing with the weight of power. Her knees felt weak, but she pushed forward, weaving through the crowd. "Mr. Kane," she called louder this time. He stopped, his security bristling, but recognition flickered in his eyes when he saw her. "You again?" His voice was guarded, suspicious. Amara held out the folded paper. "Please, this isn't a prank. I know what I saw. If you don't believe me, then prove me wrong, but don't throw this away." Richard hesitated. James stepped forward, frowning. "Sir, she's wasting your time." "Enough," Richard cut him off. His gaze locked on Amara. He reached out, took the note, and unfolded it right there on the sidewalk. As his eyes moved across the words, his expression shifted, not to fear but to something deeper. Concern sharpened into conviction. "Ethan," he murmured under his breath. Amara's chest tightened. "He doesn't see it. But those boys aren't his friends. They're using him. If you don't stop it now, it's going to get worse." Richard looked at her for a long moment, his voice low but edged with something unfamiliar. Respect. "Why are you doing this?" Amara swallowed hard. "Because I know what it's like to watch people you care about get pulled into things they can't get out of, and I don't want that to happen to him." For the first time, Richard didn't dismiss her. Instead, he folded the note carefully and slipped it into his pocket, his mind already racing. Richard Kane wasn't used to relying on strangers, but the second note from Amara cut through the walls he had built. He sat in his office that night, the folded paper on his desk beside Marcus's photographs. Ethan's face stared back at him from glossy prints, laughing, pretending, but surrounded by shadows that would swallow him whole if left unchecked. "She's right," Richard admitted, his voice low. "He's in danger." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "So what's the move?" "We keep him safe," Richard said firmly. "And if that girl knows more, we need to hear it." The next day, Richard arranged to meet Amara away from the chaos of Kane Tower. He chose a quiet cafe in Brooklyn, far from the glass walls of his world. Amara arrived cautiously, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her eyes scanning the room like she expected to be turned away. "You came," Richard said, standing as she approached. Amara hesitated before sitting. "I wasn't sure you'd actually want to listen. Most people don't hand me notes that change my life," Richard replied dryly. Then his tone softened. "Tell me everything you know." Amara leaned forward, her voice hushed. "I've seen Ethan with them. They hang out near the courts in Harlem. The leader calls himself Darius. They talk about jobs, money, things that don't sound safe. Ethan, he looks like he's trying to fit in, but he's not one of them. He doesn't see what they're doing." Richard studied her, surprised by the clarity in her words. "Why risk getting involved?" Amara's hands tightened around her notebook. "Because I've watched kids from my neighborhood disappear into gangs and drugs. Everyone always says it's not my problem until it is. I couldn't stay quiet." Marcus joined them, nodding at Amara. You've got guts, kid, and a sharp eye. You might see angles we don't. Amara blinked, caught between pride and fear. I'm not trying to be part of anything dangerous. I just didn't want him to get hurt. Richard leaned forward. And that's exactly why I believe you. Across town, Ethan's frustration boiled over when his father called that night. Ethan, we need to talk, Richard began. Talk about what? About how I'm failing to be the perfect son? About how I embarrass you? Ethan's voice cracked with anger. Richard tried to steady his tone. No. About the choices you're making. About the people you're spending time with. You don't know them, Ethan snapped. You don't know me. He ended the call before his father could answer, throwing his phone onto the bed. The distance between them stretched wider, the silence heavy. Meanwhile, Amara's mother noticed her daughter's distraction over dinner. Mara, you've been restless all week. What's going on? Amara hesitated. I'm helping someone who's in trouble. Her mother's brows knit together. What kind of trouble? I can't explain everything, Amara said quietly, but I know I'm doing the right thing. Her mother sighed, reaching across the table. Just promise me you'll be careful. Doing right doesn't mean putting yourself in danger. Amara nodded, though her heart beat faster. She was already in deeper than she'd expected. By the end of the week, Richard, Marcus, and Amara had formed an unlikely alliance. Richard provided resources, Marcus the experience, and Amara the observations that no amount of money or training could buy. Yet even as they worked together, Richard faced another challenge, whispers in the media about Ethan's behavior. A leaked photo of him with Darius's crew circulated online, sparking speculation. Reporters framed it as the reckless heir of Kane Industries, and Richard's name trended for all the wrong reasons. For the billionaire who controlled empires, public opinion was another kind of battlefield, but now his concern wasn't the headlines, it was his son's life. The tension around Ethan was tightening like a noose. The more time he spent with Darius and his crew, the more the lines blurred between rebellion and real danger. One afternoon, standing under the flickering light of a Queen's underpass, Darius pulled Ethan aside. You want to prove you're with us? Darius asked, his voice calm but carrying an edge. Ethan's throat felt dry. Haven't I already? Laughing at jokes doesn't prove anything, Darius replied. We've got something lined up, a meeting tonight, nothing you can't handle, unless you're scared. Ethan clenched his jaw. I'm not scared. Darius smiled, the kind of smile that wasn't about friendship but ownership. Good. Then you're in. Back in Manhattan, Marcus laid out a map across Richard's desk. They're moving him toward something. I don't know what the play is yet, but if they're testing him, the next step won't be small. Richard leaned over the map, his tie loosened, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. Then we stop it. Tell me where. Marcus shook his head. Not that simple. We don't have enough to bring the cops in. Without evidence, they'll brush us off. We need eyes on Ethan. Richard exhaled sharply. He won't listen to me. Every time I try, he pushes further away. A quiet voice cut in. Amara, who had been sitting nervously at the edge of the office, spoke up. You don't need to be the one he listens to right now. You need to be the one who protects him anyway. Richard turned toward her, surprised. You're 14. How do you know that? Amara's gaze didn't waver. Because my mom has to protect me even when I don't like it. Sometimes caring isn't about being liked. It's about not giving up. Marcus gave her a nod of approval. Kid's got a point. Later that evening, Amara spread her notes across the cafe table where they met. She had jotted down times, places, snippets of overheard conversations. They move around, but the courts in Harlem and the warehouse district in Queens keep coming up. If Ethan's going anywhere tonight, it'll be one of those spots. Richard studied the pages, realizing this girl noticed details that even trained men sometimes missed. You've been watching closer than anyone, he admitted. Amara shrugged. People ignore me. Makes it easier to see things. Meanwhile, Ethan sat in the back of a car with Darius and 2 others, the city's neon lights flashing across their faces. His stomach churned, but he forced his expression into calm. He couldn't back out now, not when walking away would brand him a coward in their eyes. As they pulled up near an abandoned warehouse, Ethan's pulse hammered. The street was quiet, the air damp with the smell of oil and rust. Darius leaned close. "This is it. Show us you're not just a rich boy slumming for fun." At that same hour, Marcus and Richard tracked the car from a distance, guided by Amara's notes and Marcus's instincts. The plan was thin, held together by scraps of information and urgency, but it was all they had. Richard gripped the steering wheel. "If he goes in there, we'll be ready," Marcus interrupted, his voice steady. Amara sat in the back seat, hugging her notebook to her chest, whispering a silent plea. "Please don't let me be too late." The night was only beginning, but already the stakes had shifted. The game was no longer about warnings on paper, it was about survival. The warehouse in Queens loomed like a silent giant, its broken windows catching the faint glow of street lamps. Rust creaked in the wind, and the smell of damp concrete clung to the air. Ethan stepped out of the car, his sneakers crunching against gravel. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but pride chained his feet to the ground. Darius clapped him on the shoulder. "This is it, Kane. Just a quick talk inside. Prove you're one of us and you're golden." Ethan forced a nod. "Yeah, I'm good." But his voice betrayed the knot in his stomach. The others smirked knowingly. They had seen boys like him before, hungry to belong, blind to the cost. Across the street, Marcus parked in the shadows, Richard beside him, Amara crouched low in the back. The warehouse looked like every case Marcus had worked in the past, a place where promises turned into traps. "Are we sure he's in there?" Richard asked, his voice rough with anxiety. Amara leaned forward, pointing. "That's him. I saw him get out of the car." Richard's hand gripped the door handle, ready to storm across, but Marcus caught his arm. "Not yet. We need to know what's going down before we move. If you charge in blind, you put him and yourself at risk." Richard swallowed hard, torn between impulse and reason. "That's my son. And he needs you to be smart," Marcus replied firmly. Inside the warehouse, Ethan followed the group into a cavernous room littered with crates and old machinery. The shadows felt alive, stretching and curling around them. A man waited near the center, a stranger older than Darius, his suit cheap but his eyes sharp. "So, this is the Kane boy," the man said, his voice slick as oil. "The son of the Empire." Ethan stiffened. "I'm not here because of my dad. I make my own choices." The man chuckled. "Of course you do. That's why you're here." "To prove yourself." He gestured to a duffel bag on the ground. "Pick it up, carry it out, don't ask questions." Ethan glanced at the bag, then at Darius, who gave him a small nod. His hands trembled as he crouched down. The zipper gaped slightly, revealing stacks of cash. His breath caught. This wasn't just about proving himself, it was criminal. Ethan began, but his throat closed. "What's wrong, Kane?" Darius taunted. "Too soft? Too rich to get your hands dirty?" Ethan's chest tightened. Every choice he had made to rebel, to defy his father, had led here. And now, standing over that bag, he realized the weight wasn't just paper. It was the future pressing down on him. Outside, Richard's patience snapped. He flung the car door open. "I'm not letting him walk into this." "Richard, wait!" Marcus hissed, but Richard was already moving. Amara's heart pounded as she scrambled after them, whispering to herself, "Please let us be in time." Inside, Ethan reached for the bag with shaking fingers. The older man leaned closer, his voice low and dangerous. "Pick it up, or walk away now. But know this, walking away comes with consequences." Ethan froze. Sweat dripped down his temple as the silence pressed in. In that moment, the night balanced on a knife's edge, and Ethan Kane had to decide which side he belonged to. Ethan's fingers hovered over the duffel bag, the silence around him growing unbearable. His breath came in shallow bursts, the weight of every bad choice pressing down on him. Darius smirked, arms folded, while the older man's eyes glinted with menace. "What's it going to be, Kane?" the man asked softly, though the threat in his tone was sharp. "Pick it up and you're one of us. Leave it there and you'll learn what happens when people waste my time." Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to shout that he didn't belong here, that this wasn't him, but the words stuck. His pride fought against fear, pulling him apart. At that moment, the heavy clang of the warehouse door echoed through the cavernous room. Heads turned sharply. Richard Kane strode inside, his voice cutting like steel. "Step away from my son." Ethan froze, eyes wide. "Dad," Darius laughed, though unease flickered in his expression. Well, the king himself shows up." The older man's gaze narrowed. "Richard Kane, I was wondering when your empire would notice the cracks in its walls." Richard ignored him, locking eyes with Ethan. "You don't need to prove yourself to these people. You've got nothing to gain here, only everything to lose." Ethan's voice wavered. "You don't understand. I do understand," Richard interrupted firmly. "More than you think. You wanted to escape me, to be your own man. But this isn't freedom, Ethan. It's a leash disguised as choice." The older man stepped forward, his tone mocking. "Touching speech, but your son came willingly. That makes him ours." From the shadows near the door, Marcus's voice rang out, "Not tonight." He moved with measured calm, hand resting near the holster at his side, though he hadn't drawn a weapon. His presence carried authority the gang recognized, enough to make them hesitate. Amara, pressed against the wall, scanned the room with sharp eyes. She noticed something the others missed, a second duffel bag tucked half behind a crate. A man inching closer to it, as if preparing to bolt. "Richard," she whispered urgently, pointing. "There, someone's about to run." Richard's gaze snapped to where she indicated. "Marcus!" Marcus reacted instantly, his voice booming. "Stay where you are." The man froze, caught off guard by the sudden attention. The older leader scowled. "You think you can just walk in here and dictate terms? This isn't your boardroom, Kane." Richard's tone sharpened, colder than any corporate negotiation. "No, but the law still applies here, and I made sure someone else knew where to find us." Almost on cue, sirens wailed faintly in the distance, growing louder. Blue and red lights flickered through the cracks in the warehouse windows. Darius's bravado faltered. "Cops? You called the cops?" Marcus shook his head. "We didn't have to. Your operation's been under watch longer than you realize. Tonight just happens to be your unlucky night." Panic rippled through the group. Some tried to slip toward the exits, only to find officers already pouring in, voices commanding them to freeze. The warehouse erupted in chaos, shouts, scuffling feet, the clatter of metal against concrete. In the middle of it all, Richard crossed to Ethan, gripping his son's shoulders. "Look at me, Ethan, you're coming with me now." Ethan's eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. "I thought I could handle it. I thought I could show you I wasn't weak." Richard's voice broke, raw with emotion. "You're not weak, you're my son, and nothing you could ever do will make me stop fighting for you." As police secured the gang, Amara stood quietly by the wall, her notebook clutched to her chest. She had seen danger before, but never so close, never with stakes so sharp. And yet in that moment, she realized her words had truly mattered. Ethan glanced at her, shame flickering across his face. You tried to warn me." Amara nodded, her voice steady. "I just didn't want you to disappear like the others." The sirens faded into the night as arrests were made. Richard guided Ethan toward the exit, Marcus following. Amara trailed behind, the weight of everything that had just unfolded pressing into her bones. The confrontation was over, but the reckoning had only just begun. The night after the warehouse raid felt heavier than any Richard Kane had ever endured. Back in his penthouse, the city stretched endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, but he couldn't see past the image of his son standing frozen over that duffel bag. The clamor of police radios, the sound of metal handcuffs snapping shut, it all replayed in his mind, a reminder of how close Ethan had come to being lost. Ethan sat across from him at the dining table, shoulders hunched, face pale. For once, no trace of defiance lingered in his posture. He stirred the untouched food on his plate, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're going to hate me." Richard's throat tightened. "I don't hate you, Ethan. I hate the choices you almost made, but hate you? Never." Ethan's hands clenched into fists. "I wanted to be more than your son. I didn't want to just be the rich kid who gets everything handed to him. I thought if I proved myself, if I risked something, I'd finally feel real. Richard leaned forward, his voice soft but firm. Being real doesn't mean throwing yourself into fire just to see if it burns. You don't need to prove your worth to people who want to use you. You're already enough, though I should have told you that a long time ago. Ethan blinked rapidly, his jaw trembling. He turned his face away, unwilling to let tears fall. Meanwhile, across Brooklyn, Amara sat at her kitchen table, her mother watching her closely. "Mara, I know something's been going on. You've been coming home late. You've been worried all the time." "What is it?" Amara hesitated, then admitted. "I helped someone, a boy who was about to get dragged into something bad." Her mother's brows furrowed. "What do you mean, helped? Mara, you're 14. That's not your responsibility." "It was my choice," Amara replied firmly. "I saw what was happening, and if I stayed quiet, I'd never forgive myself." Her mother sighed deeply, eyes full of both fear and pride. "You've got more courage than some adults I know. But promise me something, baby. Promise me you'll remember you don't have to carry the world by yourself." Amara nodded, though the weight in her chest reminded her she already carried more than most. In the days that followed, headlines exploded across the news. Billionaire's son linked to gang activity. Kane empire under scrutiny after heir's misstep. Cameras swarmed the Kane Tower entrance, journalists clamoring for sound bites. Richard issued a carefully crafted statement to shield Ethan from further damage, emphasizing youth, mistakes, and second chances. But behind the polished words lay a father's desperate attempt to protect his son's dignity. Inside the penthouse, Richard confronted Ethan gently. "The world will try to define you by one moment. Don't let them. Learn from it, yes, but don't let it chain you." Ethan looked up, his eyes searching. "Do you really believe I can change?" "I don't just believe it," Richard said quietly. "I need it." "And so do you." For Ethan, the words cut deeper than lectures ever had. For the first time, he saw not just his father's authority, but his vulnerability. Amara, meanwhile, kept her distance from the spotlight. She refused interviews, avoided curious classmates, and held tightly to her notebook. When Tasha pressed her, saying, "Girl, you basically saved a billionaire's son." "Why not let people know?" Amara shook her head. "It's not about people knowing. It's about him still being alive. That's enough." At night, she wrote in her journal, "Sometimes the hardest thing isn't speaking up. It's choosing to stay humble after." The city kept moving, its noise relentless, but for those three lives, Richard, Ethan, and Amara, time felt slower, charged with reflection. The storm had passed, but the ground beneath them was forever changed. Spring crept slowly into New York, softening the city's edges with budding trees and warmer breezes. For Richard Kane, the change outside mirrored the one stirring within his home. His penthouse, once a place of silence and distance, now held conversations that reached deeper than surface-level pleasantries. One morning, Richard found Ethan sitting at the dining table, not scrolling through his phone, not slouched in defiance, but reading a book. The sight startled him. "Good morning," Richard said carefully. Ethan glanced up, almost sheepish. "Morning?" He hesitated, then added, "Marcus recommended this." He lifted the book slightly. "Said it might help me think about choices differently." Richard smiled faintly, pulling out a chair. "And what do you think so far?" Ethan shrugged, though his eyes betrayed thoughtfulness. "That maybe running toward danger doesn't make you brave. Facing what you're afraid of does." Richard's chest tightened with quiet pride. "That's a lesson most adults never learn." The changes weren't sudden or perfect. Ethan still bristled at authority, still carried the scars of his rebellion, but he began channeling his energy differently, helping at community centers, shadowing Marcus when he allowed it, learning how discipline and freedom could coexist. Richard gave him space but stayed close, determined not to let distance swallow them again. Meanwhile, Amara balanced her own transformation. At school, teachers noticed her sharper focus, her writing more vivid than ever. But she kept her role in Ethan's rescue mostly hidden. Only Tasha knew the full story, and even she sometimes shook her head in disbelief. "You realize, Mara, you're living like something out of a novel," Tasha teased one afternoon. Amara smirked. Maybe. But novels are just stories until somebody writes them down. This was real. At home, her mother marveled at her resilience. You've always been strong, but lately, it's like you've stepped into who you were meant to be. Amara hugged her mother tightly. I just did what I thought was right. What Amara didn't know was that Richard had begun quietly arranging opportunities for her future. Without her knowledge, he set up a scholarship fund under a discreet name, ensuring that when college applications came, financial barriers wouldn't stand in her way. He told Marcus, "That girl saved my son's life with nothing but her courage." "The least I can do is make sure hers isn't limited by circumstance," Marcus agreed. "She's got the kind of strength you can't buy. And she reminded you what really matters." Richard nodded, humbled. For all his billions, it had taken the handwritten words of a 14-year-old girl to wake him to the truth. Power meant nothing if it didn't protect those you loved. Ethan, too, found himself inspired by Amara. One afternoon he asked his father, "Do you think she'd ever want to hang out? Not like anything weird, just to say thank you." Richard chuckled. "I think she'd appreciate that more than any gift." So Ethan found himself sitting on a Brooklyn stoop beside Amara weeks later, awkward at first, but slowly opening up. "You don't have to thank me," Amara said when he stumbled over words. "Just don't waste the second chance you got." Ethan nodded solemnly. "I won't. I promise." The city pulsed around them, cars honking, children playing in the streets, the rhythm of New York never stopping. But for Richard, Ethan, and Amara, time moved differently now. They were bound together by a moment of courage that had shifted the course of their lives. The note, once just ink on paper, had become a symbol of trust, of second chances, of bridges built between worlds that rarely touched. And in the quiet of his office late one evening, Richard unfolded the original slip of paper, running his thumb over Amara's hurried handwriting. "Words," he murmured. "Simple words, and they saved my son." The city's rhythm never stopped, but for Richard, Ethan, and Amara, life felt slower in the weeks that followed. The chaos of the warehouse had faded into memory, yet its lessons lingered, shaping every choice they made. Richard spent more time at home, leaving boardrooms earlier, carving out dinners where conversations mattered more than contracts. He noticed the small things now, how Ethan's laugh returned in fragments, how silence no longer felt like a wall but a pause that could be filled with trust. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Ethan sat across from his father. His voice was tentative but steady. "Dad, I don't know how to say this right, but thank you for not giving up on me." Richard's chest ached with a mix of relief and regret. "I never will, Ethan. Not once. Not ever." The boy nodded, his eyes glistening. "And Amara, she saved me. If she hadn't stepped in, I don't know where I'd be." Richard leaned back, remembering the trembling hand that had passed him a crumpled note outside Lincoln Center. "Words saved you," he said softly. "Hers, and the courage behind them." Across Brooklyn, Amara walked home from school, her backpack heavier with new dreams. Her mother linked arms with her, proud but cautious. "You've grown, Mara. But don't let the world make you old before your time." Amara smiled faintly. "I won't. I just want to use what I've learned. If I can help one person, maybe it's enough." Her mother kissed the top of her head. "Baby, you already have." Not long after, Richard invited Amara and her mother to dinner, not at a glittering tower, but at a quiet neighborhood restaurant where the clatter of dishes mixed with laughter. Ethan sat beside Amara, awkward at first, then easing into conversation. "I don't deserve what you did for me," Ethan admitted, fiddling with a napkin. Amara met his eyes. "Maybe not. But you get to decide what you do with it now. Don't waste it." Her words weren't scolding. They were a challenge, one Ethan accepted with a small but determined nod. As dessert plates were cleared, Richard lifted his glass of water, his tone solemn. "Amara, I owe you more than I can ever repay. You reminded me of something I had almost forgotten, that life is measured not by what we own but by what we protect. You saved my son with nothing but courage and conviction. For that, I will always be grateful." Amara shifted uncomfortably, unused to praise of this scale. "I just did what anyone should have done." "No," Richard said gently. "Most people wouldn't have." "That makes you extraordinary." The evening ended with laughter that felt genuine, bridges built not by wealth or obligation, but by shared humanity. In the weeks that followed, Ethan worked with Marcus at local community centers, helping younger kids navigate choices he once stumbled over himself. Richard quietly supported Amara's education, ensuring her path forward wouldn't be hindered by circumstance. And Amara kept writing, her notebook filling with stories, not fantasies but truths carved from the city she knew so well. The note that had once been nothing more than folded paper became a symbol to them all, of second chances, of voices that matter, of lives forever changed by the courage to speak up. As spring turned to summer, the city buzzed on, unaware of the quiet miracle stitched into its fabric, that a billionaire, his restless son and a girl from Brooklyn had crossed paths, and in that collision found redemption. And so their story closes, but its echo remains, that sometimes the smallest voice can alter the loudest fate. Before we part ways, don't forget, subscribe to this channel for more powerful stories like this one. And if you want to keep the journey alive, click on the video suggested on your screen right now. Another tale waits, just as gripping, just as unforgettable.